A lot to get through in just a little under 4 hours. So welcome to the workshop on the Bologna process and update, introduction to an update. My name is Kate Freeman. I am a senior credential analyst at Spantran. I am also the chair of the TAICEP Certificate Committee. This workshop was a labor of love for many, many months. We have two of the other committee members here, and they're going to introduce themselves. But this workshop, we sent you the information about it, that if you want free of charge, it's normally a $250 option, you can take an examination that's going to be available immediately after this workshop, and I will give you your login information about that for all the people who have already registered for the workshop. It's not too late. If you want to do it, just let me know, and I will put you on the list and send you an email with your workshop information. And as a special bonus, if you take the exam and pass it before Wednesday, you'll get your certificate here. Okay? So, and be recognized at the lunch on Wednesday. So that's just a special bonus. It's all the instructions are there. It's we have a bank of 100 questions. You have to take 50 and pass 35 of those questions. So it's very easy. You can take the exam as many. You can start and stop. You don't have to take it all at once. You can start, stop, go back and review your questions before you submit it, and you get 2 attempts at the exam. So anyway, so let's get started. Once again, I'm Kate Freeman. I've been in credentials evaluation for almost 30 years. But Bologna has always been something that's been very interesting to me, and I've seen the development of it over the years. So that was one of the reasons the certificate committee decided that we wanted to work on this workshop. I should also say 2 other people who are on the certificate committee are not here at the conference. We have Martha Van Devender from ECE. She'll be taking over as the chair of the committee in January. And Panambi, I forgot Panambi's last name. Oh, she's from ORT University in Uruguay. So, and we're also looking for members of the committee, so if anybody's interested in joining, we especially want university-based people and people based outside of North America. We're pretty packed with North Americans and credentials evaluation agencies. So anyway, Rebecca, do you want to, Marian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marianne Tompkins-Carter, and I am the Manager of Evaluation Services at the Ontario College of Teachers. So the Ontario College of Teachers is the licensing body for the teaching profession in the province of Ontario, here in Canada, and I'm also a member of the Certificate Committee. So welcome to all of you, and I hope you enjoy this session and that we have a chance to connect at lunch. Thanks.
We're also very, very lucky to have Luca Lantero here from Cimea in Italy. He's also the head of the Bologna Follow-Up Group, or BFUG, as you all will see, Secretariat, and he's also currently the president of the Lisbon Recognition Bureau. So Luca will be adding commentary and his thoughts, or be able to answer any questions that we can't answer. So, Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Murphy. I've been working in different realms of credential evaluation for about 20 years after Kate got me started. I blame it all or owe it all to her, whichever the day brings. Currently, I'm also a doctoral student at Northeastern University, and my research centers around the use of credential evaluation for underemployed immigrants into the United States. So if you'd like to talk to me about that, I'm happy to twist your ear for as long as you have. What we're going to do to get started is you've all seen our information about the Kahoot app. Good morning, come on in. We're going to get started with a little pre-quiz for Kahoot. So if you have that up and available, I'll give you the PIN number, and then we can get started with that. Does anyone need any help downloading the app or getting the app ready before I give the PIN? Okay. Is it asking you for a quiz PIN somewhere? Yes. Okay.
Rebecca, should I just give the pin so we get started? Rebecca? Sorry? I'll give the pin so we can get started.
Well, she doesn't have to. Hold on. I'll give you the pin now. Just step ahead. You can click in as a student. Yeah. So why don't I give you the pin for this one? I think that should work. Okay. All right, so the pin is 955851. And that should bring you to the quiz. 955851. Bear with us. We're not all the best technologically here. We're giving it a try. 955851. And you'll be asked to put in some sort of a nickname or something.
And we only have 6 people. There we go. We got 10.
955851. I don't know how to do it if you're on the laptop. Yeah. All right. So if maybe you can look on with a friend and take the, yep, you're in. Okay. All right, we're going to get started with those of you who are in. It's very quick. All right, so we've got question 1 of 9. How would you rate your knowledge of the Bologna process? And you're only going to have 10 seconds to answer each question. All right, it's all right. We're going to move, it's okay. Everyone should have gotten that one correct. So the shapes correspond with the answers. You should, okay, hold on. It doesn't show the question. All right, I don't know how to stop this. All right, hold on. It's not showing you the questions? We're going to skip this and move on to start the presentation because I don't know what that's happening, but we'll figure that out later. Okay? Sure. All right, I gotta load it up again because I don't know what the question was. All right, so show of hands. Put your Kahoot down. How would you rate your knowledge of the Bologna process? If you raise your hand, please, if you know absolutely nothing about Bologna. All right, that's a good place. How about if you're from Bologna? Nobody? If you're ready to learn more about the Bologna process. All right, and if you should be running this workshop. No? Okay. We are going to show a quick video that Luca has been generous enough to point us to, and mention also that we are in a really exciting place to have this workshop because this is actually the 20th anniversary of the Bologna process signatory. So with that, I'm going to have you start the video. Thank you.
20 years have passed since the Bologna Declaration. 20 years of work together that has built efficient processes for life in higher education. We have grown together and created our future together. Together we have created tools that are able to benefit the protagonists of higher education institutions, students, researchers, and teachers. Because they are the sparks that light the fire of knowledge. It is from their hearts, their minds, their restless spirit, perennially searching, that the university can be reborn every day as the engine of the future, breathing freedom, audacity, and the dream of its origins, when the university was born from a passion for reality and its mystery, when teachers and students went on research trips together in the common desire for discovery, when belonging to a university meant speaking a single language, the language of knowledge. What happened then can be relived today. When we reconquer the values that created us, when we breathe the audacity of the beginning, when we rediscover the freedom of the university, becoming once again ambassadors of knowledge. Bologna Process goes global. Back to basics, back to the future.
Thank you. So we're going to get started. Yeah, let you do that. Yeah. I don't know what happened to her on this side.
All right, so we have a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please keep your phone on silent. Feel free to ask questions at any time. No question is a stupid question. The only stupid question is the one that's not asked. Okay. It's not working.
That was the video.
Yeah. This doesn't like to work. All right, so this is the agenda. We got a lot to go through. You should all have the slides available there, so this just does not work.
We are currently experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. It is Monday morning. That's right. Election day.
Oh, there we go. Oh,
Which,
it's
so
this
what are we
button,
going to do?
yep,
What were you practicing?
this one. It's the bottom one. Okay, it's all
Good
right.
to know.
Here you go, it's
All
all
right.
here, all here.
Yeah, I'm going to need my notes.
Yeah, all right, but just to make sure, okay.
All right. All right. Now, hopefully, without any more technical glitches, we can we can move forward. So what we've got up here now is just a very succinct summary of the history. I don't want to read it. You'll be able to read it at another time. But it really gives you a good sense of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about the purpose of the Bologna Declaration and what it has moved forward throughout the European area. So the first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about the history of this Bologna process is, of course, who. And that is who is involved, who started it, how it got discovered. This is a full summary of who has joined the Bologna Declaration and when. What you'll notice is that it wasn't everybody all at once. It has been an ongoing evolution of membership, and it has been expanding not every year, but after the initial signatory process, maybe a little bit here and there. Every couple of years, another country or two has joined. So you will all have a copy of this. When you go to take the exam, if you choose to do the certificate, you'll have access to this. So don't feel like you need to write everything down throughout the whole process. The slides were emailed to you, and we'll make sure if you didn't get them before that you do have them later, just so everyone's not panicking and trying to write. So the question is really why, right? Why did this process get started? We know who, We need to know why. You know, in a lot of ways, and Luca just mentioned this to me very briefly, this comes in under the heading of mindset and creating a mindset about the education process and about what the education purpose has been. Essentially, we're looking at the Bologna process as creating a system of readable degrees, a comprehensive, understandable system of 2 different levels at the outset, an understandable system of credits, looking toward the mobility of students within that area, and also creating a real sense of European identity in terms of employment coming out of these degree processes. So this wasn't something that, we tend to think, those of us who are from North America, hey, they created this great system for us to be able to understand what they're doing. And that really, not really the case. They were creating an internal system. So we've seen who, we've seen what they're talking about, we've talked about a little bit why, but how? How does this process work? Well, over the years, it has become a very freely and smoothly flowing system with a series of conferences that are held every 2 to 3 years by the ministers of education. They're held in different regions throughout the European continent. And the ministerial conferences are the opportunity to sit, to talk, to work through the ideas leading toward this process. Each ministerial conference has resulted in a document, a declaration, a communique that has outlined what that conference achieved, and also what the conference would like to achieve going forward. So the result is they've had follow-up groups, the Bologna follow-up groups. We affectionately have been calling them the BFUGs. The Bologna follow-up groups are looking forward. So it's not all about looking past, it's not all about what we're doing right now, but what can we achieve as a group together going forward. The secretariat of each group is generally formed by the country that will host the next session, the next ministerial conference. And these are hosted, there's decided, the powers that be within the country that will host the next session are members of the secretariat. So it's a very orderly process. Each of the systems, each of the sites has been chosen actually for very interesting reasons. Sometimes there's a lot of symbolism in the location, and that you can see as you go through, as we'll go through each of the different conferences, you'll see and kind of understand a little bit of the symbolism. So the question is, did it all start off in '99 when we all think it did? But the answer is really no. The Bologna process actually went back to the Sorbonne Declaration, apologies, Kate. And I actually just heard a really fantastic little trivia bit from Luca about the Sorbonne Declaration that I'm going to share because I think it's fantastic. So the Sorbonne Declaration came out of the education ministers of these 4 countries. And as it turns out, they had a captive audience of each other for an 11-hour flight to the United States at one point. And when they were in this captive audience environment, they chatted a bit. And that is how the Sorbonne Declaration came about, in this long 11-hour conversation about education and about their vision and about moving forward with their vision. So I thought that was a really great little bit of.
I think it was the last Concorde flight.
Even better, the last Concorde flight. We're going to hold you to that.
The only problem is that was not 11 hours,
No,
I don't remember.
the Concorde was much faster.
Yeah, 9 hours, I don't remember. But there is also the check-in period.
So apparently while they were waiting in line, checking their baggage, waiting to collect their baggage after the flight.
Even if they are VIP, they have to wait a little bit.
maybe in the passport line. Right, exactly. In any case, it was a flight to the United States. And these 4 ministers had an opportunity to really chat. Maybe it was great that they didn't have all of their assistants and so forth with them, I don't know. They were able to hammer something out. And the Bologna Declaration came out of that. But really, as you can see, the goals were to increase mobility, really for students, for staff also, for teaching staff, for faculty. This idea of the job market comes up, this idea of being able to promote the education of the region, to promote job opportunities and employment for those. So a year after that, now we come to the Bologna Declaration. So these 4 ministers got together, they created the Bologna Declaration, and a year later, 29 ministers met in Bologna to have a conversation of a similar way. Now, they probably weren't as captive an audience. They probably had lots of other people around them talking, so it maybe took a little bit of a longer time, but the vision is the same. This common vision of a European higher education area started to take form, started to become a reality for them. The establishment of credits was discussed for the first time, of common credits. There's a level of quality assurance that started becoming apparent, right? So having this idea of quality assurance between the different types of systems. Now, one thing to stress about this entire process is that this was never an idea to create a common, unified education system across the entire area. That's never the approach, is to say, okay, everybody's education system is going to look the same, and we're going to create a unified university system. The idea is to promote unity, but also to promote movement between the systems and an easily flowing system, so that you have each national identity, the national culture, mindset, outlook, but with a goal of creating a regional process as well. So each individual country is not losing their education system and the unique aspects of it, but they're coming together for a common purpose. So these are the 29 signatories of the original 99 declaration. Now, the next time that all of these countries met was in 2001, and they met in Prague. And when I mentioned the symbolism of the locations, Prague was the first conference after the signatory, the original signatory. And Prague was chosen for a specific purpose, and it was chosen to show unity, to show that this was going to be something that was going to be across Europe, wanted to show the unity of the region. And so it was chosen very, very specifically for that purpose. So now we've got some additional nations have been joined. The objectives have been expanded upon. And then we moved into Berlin in 2003. So again, chosen for a specific purpose, expanded the number of countries a little bit more. And between 2001 and 2003, there were a number of discussions. So this isn't a system where, okay, we met in Bologna in 99, and now nothing's happening until we meet in 2001, and then nothing's happening until we meet in 2003. There's a lot of background conversations, workings, committees going on between 2001 and 2003. Really the conversation about increasing the attractiveness of the area for education, increasing the relevance of the European education systems was discussed. There was a long list of official conferences between Prague and Berlin, and I didn't want to just make a list on the slide, but it went on and on and on. Essentially, there was a conversation about quality assurance. There was a conversation about recognition and the use of credits between systems. There is a conversation about the development of joint degrees between different schools and systems. And also long conversations about the social dimension of the Bologna process and what that would mean to each individual signatory. So 2003, now we're in Berlin, and I just want to add that there is one country missing from this list, which is Russia. So Russia should be included on this list. It's on the map. Somehow it didn't make it onto the slide, so apologies to Russia. But now our total is up to 40. So you can see in a very short amount of time, in just a brief 4 years, we've gone from 29 signatories up to 40. And if you include that Sorbonne Declaration in '98, we've gone up exponentially with the number of countries that have signed on to this process and gotten really excited about this process. It reaffirms the idea that higher education is a public good. So this goes beyond the idea of this is not education for education's sake. Education is really designed for the public, and it is a public good, it's a public right in each of these signatory countries. The other real big highlight in the 2003 conference is this connection between research and higher education. Because for the times preceding this conference, the research area was completely separate. So this is the first recognition of this idea of researchers and the higher education systems. We moved in 2005 into the Bergen Conference, and again added additional countries. Now we're up to 45 countries. So in a very short time, we've gotten very close to the current number of countries. So Bergen, the highlight of Bergen really is this first time that we're seeing 3 cycles. So remember, at the previous conference, there was a lot of conversation about research and researchers. So this is where you see the Bologna Declaration signatories going from a concept of 2 cycles of education, higher education, into 3 cycles. And that's where you see the researchers coming in and the doctoral level educations coming in. So this is a key point. Again, we talk about the social aspect. So then this is a conference where there's a lot of conversations about enabling students to complete their studies, to breaking down some of those barriers of social walls and social ideas, really allowing students to overcome economic obstacles in their education process. And the conversation has now moved and shifted in the entire Bologna process, and countries are now firmly on board with this process, and you can see the conversations evolving throughout. So this is a really interesting, this is a turn point year. Now, the map is a little bit bluer here. That's because as we're getting closer, there's more and more countries involved and very few countries left to join, you could say. So the 2007 conference in London, the ministerial conference in London, added only 1 additional nation, and that was Montenegro. And the conversation started becoming a little bit different as well. So now we're talking a little bit more about the alignment of the European higher education area and the European research area, because up until this point, these were very different and distinct concepts. So now we've moved very quickly into 2009. The interesting point about the 2009 conference is that no additional nations joined. So our membership has now stayed, and I hate to use the word stagnant because it really indicates a negative connotation in my mind, but I would say stable. So now the Bologna signatories list of 46. It's a very stable group. Membership levels haven't adjusted, changed. They've become quite confident in what is required for membership. There's a confidence in the focus of the Bologna process, And there's a goal-setting process as well at this point. Now, because of that stability and because of that confidence, the signatories are able to look really far ahead at this point and to say, yeah, now we've got this great system going, we're going to move forward, we're going to set some really idealistic goals, keep ourselves moving forward. So the idea by 2020, and now we're closing in on that, as you know, is that at least 20% of the graduates of the EHEA should have a study abroad or training period. Now, remember, that's not necessarily European students coming to study in the United States or Canada or other areas. They're talking even internally within the EHEA. But that's the goal. You know, the idea is we've set up this system of mobility, and now we need to see our students using that system of mobility within our area. They have diploma supplements. They have 3 levels of education talked about. We've brought in researchers, and now we want to make sure that our students are taking advantage of all these systems we've set up. So this is now the goal.
And is that 20% that's going to graduate university or high school or?
University. Yeah, not very much of this is being talked about in terms of the high school.
Only higher education.
Only higher education. Yep. So in 2010, there's a ministerial anniversary conference and the addition of yet another country. So now Kazakhstan has joined in. This is a recommitment type of ministerial conference. Members are recommitting to the ideals that they have put forth. They're confirming their commitment to the process. They're confirming the roles that they're playing. They're confirming the role that higher education is playing within the entire process. And in 2012, the signatories met in Bucharest. Once again, no additional countries or signatories were added on at this time, again, demonstrating the stability of the process and the stability of the system. Once again, the signatories discussed the goal setting for moving forward in 2020. And again, that mobility strategy, the idea of students being able to move around the region. As we're getting to more recent conferences, you can see, once again, we've added yet one more signatory. So Belarus joined in 2015. 2015 is also a landmark year for this renewed vision of Bologna, because now this has been quite a process. You know, it's closing in on that over 15-year mark. As you know, anything that happens over 10, 15 years really needs to be evaluated and assessed a little bit more. You know, you want to move from stability out of stagnation, making sure that you're looking forward. And so with any process that happens for that length of time, there's a discussion about the renewed vision. Do we need to change anything? Do we need to adapt? What do we need to add? You know, how do we identify the best process? How do we go forward? There are a lot of things have changed in the education environment and also in the world, the geopolitical environment between 1999 and 2015. And so like with everything else, the Bologna Process signatories need to adjust to that and rethink. Much more recently, the most recent, we have our 2018 Ministerial Conference in Paris. So again, there have been no additional signatories. So Belarus was the most recent signatory to the Bologna Conference. There have been additional dialogues set up now between the European higher education area nations and those who are not European higher education members. The goal of the entire process is really to support each other and have the nations be able to promote the process. It's not a very individualistic process, and so what happens is, one of the lists on here is to look at a Belarus strategy. And that's really indicative of the fact that the entire group wants to be able to promote each other. They don't want somebody falling behind now that they've signed on. Let's make sure that they're able to keep their commitments, keep their agreement. So at this time, Belarus is the only country that has not created a diploma supplement. And that's, it's not a concern per se, but it's something that the rest of the members want to make sure that they're supporting. So they've worked toward that at this point. Yes.
Could you stand up and, because we
Yeah.
can't hear you.
For the second point, you said the dialogue was increasing with non-HEA countries.
Which countries were not part of the EHEA at this point?
No, which are the countries involved in that dialogue?
Then I'm going to defer to Luca on that one. Can you answer that question? Mm-hmm.
As you can see, we started to have that Bologna Global Dialogue, Bologna Policy Forum. And then it depends about every 2 or 3 years, the country that hosts the ministerial conference propose dialogue with some part of the other region in the world. In the past, the dialogue was most concentrated on Mediterranean countries, Africa, and Arab countries, some neighbor countries that we have, of course, in Europe. But right now, in the new conference that we will have in Rome, the dialogue will be more global. And then it means that the involvement will be not only with countries, but also with international organizations like TAICEP, of course. We want to invite also the relevant stakeholders at international level. But the dialogue is open with everyone. Of course, there are some peculiarities. I make you a real example. We have a diplomatic relation with Kosovo in Italy. But as you probably know, some country in the EHA country doesn't have those. So we propose to invite their representatives, but others can say or make some concern, diplomatic concern. So this is something that we have to be careful sometimes to propose the dialogue with countries that are okay for everyone in terms of diplomatic dialogue. For example, Taiwan is an issue, for example, if we invite China, of course, etc. So it's something that you probably understand, of course, without any kind of problem.
Thanks, Luca.
I would guess that Australia and New Zealand would be in the dialogue because they are very close already to Bologna requirements.
Well,
in terms of many things.
yeah, and this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about membership and what is involved in membership and what the requirements are, because that may be key to understanding, why Australia and New Zealand aren't members or aren't signatories to the Bologna Declaration. And so there are a couple of conditions that need to be met. And one of the primary conditions is actually that in order to be a signatory to the Bologna process, a country has to be party to the European Cultural Convention. So that's a key part. If you're not going to sign on to the European Cultural Convention, then you're not going to be able to be a member of the Bologna process. Would that be an appropriate thing to say at this point? Yeah. Okay. So that's one of the primary memberships. Yeah.
Is the cultural convention the same as the European Union? So it
No, may I say something?
Please. No is the short answer, but he can give a longer answer.
The Cultural Convention is run by the Council of Europe. You know that there is a Council of Europe that is an international organization with at least 55 countries. We are speaking about physical Europe, okay, with Russia as well, with all the former Soviet Union countries, Balkan countries, etc. The European Union have the Council of the Council of European Union that is different. Sometimes there is a misleading of the two. please note that this is a real European, at the very beginning, she informed me that it's an European process. Why? Because the starting point is the European Cultural Convention that say, if you have time to look on internet, is a convention to spread the European culture, taking into account the diversity of countries. And the European Cultural Convention is open for the signature from other countries outside the countries of the Council of Europe. As you can see, there is Kazakhstan, Belarus, and then I don't remember the third one, but they are outside that convention, but they signed the convention as well. And it was an issue, can I say something about the Israel?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was an issue about, some years ago, about the candidature of Israel in the process. Of course, it was a complicated issue because, I don't say a problem, but an issue, because they didn't sign and they don't want to sign the European Cultural Convention. Do you know why? Do you know why they didn't sign it? For the fact that the US say don't sign it. And so they don't sign the European Cultural Convention, and they asked to be part. And then after a long dialogue, they changed their mind, and right now we have a formal relation with them, with the process with them, because we think that we are one of the most important countries for us. But of course, they are not formally part of the process. Okay.
Thank you, Luca.
It's an intergovernmental process, voluntary. It means that we have to follow a lot of very, very formal rules. And if you think that within the same table we have Azerbaijan and Armenia, that right now there is a formal war among this, between those countries. We have Cyprus and Turkey, Ukraine and Russia. So it's pretty a problem. We have also the Holy See in Italy, of course. And so it's a very problematic issue sometimes.
I think Luca's point is really important to make, and that is it is an intergovernmental organization, and it is entirely voluntary. So there's no enforcement of the process. There's no enforcement of, and this will become clearer later when we talk about diploma supplements, right? There's no enforcement that something has to look at a certain way. This is a really voluntary process, and it's a collaboration. It's a collaboratory process, would you say? Yeah. So in addition to being a member of the European Cultural Convention, there has to be this voluntary commitment to the goals and the visions of the Bologna Declaration, those ideas of international mobility of students, the ideas of the autonomy of higher education institutions, and that's a key point as well, especially. Student participation, and it's not something that we brought up with the entire history, but at a certain point, student unions and student voices became really important in the Bologna process and recognized as an important member or group of members in the education process in the European area. And so that is one of the commitments as well that potential signatories need to remember, is that student voice is a part of higher education. Also, that social dimension that we talked about of higher education. So those are, and public responsibility, the public right for higher education. So these are all of these social and educational ideas and ideals that need to be looked at and considered if a nation is thinking about becoming a member. There are also a couple of other types of membership within the Bologna process. So there are the individual member nations, but there's also the consultative membership. So some of the other non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations have consultative membership. Organizations like, was it UNESCO and
European Student Union.
The European Student Union.
European University Association.
The European University Association. So organizations like that have consultative membership to the Bologna Declaration signatories. There's also partner members. like the BFUG, the Bologna follow-up group. They're considered partner members to the signatory. And I saw one trivia point. I'm not sure, I want to confirm with you, but there are currently 2 countries in the European region that are not signatories, and those are Malta and San Marino.
No, Malta is signatory.
Malta is the signatory?
San Marino asked to the procedure to be part is to ask to the Secretariat to be part, and the Secretariat asked on behalf of the BFUG and the other countries to prepare a national report.
Okay.
Last year, we received.
Do you want to come up here?
Okay. It's a news for everyone, and also it's the first time that I say that publicly. We received the application from San Marino. The official application came in August this year to our office because we are the Secretariat from 2018-2020 period. And then we asked them to produce the national report, and we expect the report at the beginning of November to discuss during the next BFUG meeting the report and the fact to accept San Marino in the process. But who have the power to accept another country? The ministers. So during the next ministerial conference, the minister, if they will accept San Marino, they stated that point in the communique, in the next communique.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about just the history and structure that we can talk about now?
So you had started talking about the membership requirements, the first one being that they're part of the European Cultural Convention.
Mhm.
Are there other requirements?
Luca. There are, yes.
To accept the 3 main pillars, of course, qualification framework ECTS, quality assurance system, and be in line with the Lisbon Recognition Convention elements, of course. There are the 3 main pillars that you can see in the Paris communique, very, very clearly stated. And of course, there was also another important issue that is very close and related to academic freedom. Please note that when in 2015 something very strange happened, because we passed from the Bologna process to the European Higher Education area. Belarus asked to be in the process, but we have a lot of point against that fact from students. Mm-hmm. They fight a lot, and it was very, very terrible. I was at the ministerial conference there in Yerevan. It was very terrible because all the countries, and Nordic countries also, say, no, we don't want Belarus there, with the minister of Belarus and the delegation. And they start to fight a lot. And we change very, very quickly the communique during the night. We work a lot during the whole night to change and to find a compromise. And at the end, one Nordic minister said, of course, we don't want to be the country that want to block or stop the entrance. And there is the reason why they create a special group to look the implementation of the Belarus reform. And right now, the situation, thanks God, changed a little bit. But at the very beginning was very, very interesting at that point. So you have to be accepted by other countries. This is the last condition.
Could I throw in one thing from my experience?
Absolutely.
Which is that...
Could you stand up so everybody can hear?
Sorry. Which is that one of the things that I think is nothing short of miraculous arising out of the whole Bologna has been the way that many of the universities for their first degrees had 5 years, 4 years, even 6 years. I can't remember what it was in Italy, but I think it was 6 years for the first degree.
Right now?
So, no, so, right.
4 to 6.
Right, so your point is they were all at different levels.
They all moved to first cycle, second cycle.
We're going to be going, you're way ahead of us.
Yeah,
We're going all over that.
You're predicting the future.
No, it's not. It was not a miracle. It was very, very suffered process.
It was a
Really.
long, drawn-out process behind the curtain that you didn't see. Right. Yes, and I just want to remind also, we are recording, so if you can speak up as loud as possible, or just give me time to repeat your question.
I just want to understand a little bit more about the connection with the European Union and
So the connection between the European Union and the Bologna process. So great little Venn diagram to think about is that all European Union countries are currently signatories of the Bologna process, but all Bologna process signatories are not members of the European Union. And Luca can expand upon that, please.
No, sorry, because it's very
apologize,
interesting.
please.
But European Union is one of the official member of the process. So the process right now is 48 countries plus the European Union. European Union participate as a member like other countries. Only members, official members, I mean countries, and the European Union have the right to vote. Of course, that right was never used within the process. We used the consensus instead to vote. But we have also rules to vote. It's an intergovernmental process. It means that only 48 countries plus European Union can vote. The consultative members that are part of the Bureau, etc., also UNESCO, Council of Europe, they have no right to vote. They are not member like 48 countries plus the European Union. So the European Union have the delegation within the process. And then, of course, all the European Union countries have the participate in the process. The other point is very simple. I used to say before that point, European Union is the most, one of the organizations, the three main international organizations that have a lot of money. And then it's something like in a wedding, who decide the music. And sometimes they take a lot of elements of the process and they use the element of the process also within the European Union. The new idea of the European Union is to create right now a European education area, EEA, that is also involved the school systems. Is a new idea at European level, but is complementary and with the EHEA. But please note, the EHEA is not European Union. It's more, and when we speak within the EHEA, we have to be very, very careful on that point because we don't want to be a lot of Eurocentric, considering the European Union.
So we just have a couple of more minutes left of this section. Are there any other questions or clarification points that we can try to answer for you? No. All right. So I'm going to do a quick little configuration with my computer, and we're going to try to quiz you. But Kahoot clearly is not working for us. So this could be a quick raise of hands, but I have prizes. So give me a second. I'm going to pull up the Kahoot quiz and award prizes.
In the meantime, how many of you are from universities in the United States? Okay, raise your hand. How many of you are from outside the U.S.? How about in Canada? Outside of Canada, outside of North America? Anybody? Okay, wonderful. Anybody who does not work for a university? Okay, great, all right. We just wanted to get some idea of where you are. Do you want to pick some questions?
Okay. All right, so very quickly, can anybody tell me which country was not an original signatory to the Bologna Declaration? I have choices of Lithuania, raise your hands. Slovenia, raise your hand. Poland, Albania.
Yay, you
Yay,
won.
one winner. All right. Can you catch? If I throw you a can.
Albania.
Albania. Of those 4 countries listed, Albania was not an original signatory. All right. One more really quick. Which one? All right. one more. Which country of the following is not a Bologna Declaration signatory currently? So, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, or Turkmenistan? Oh, very good. Turkmenistan, all of the other countries, so Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine are currently signatories, but Turkmenistan is not. Okay.
This bottom button is just moves the slides.
Can keep you awake and alive with chocolate. So we're going to move on at this point to the section on communiques.
Are you okay? I'm all set. All right. Okay.
So as Rebecca had mentioned previously, after each meeting, there was a communique that was published. And the communiques documented the meetings of the European ministers in charge of higher education. And it was an opportunity to kind of reflect, but also look forward. So what was going to be the focus until the next meeting? And what was going to what was the follow-up group going to be charged with for that 2-year period? So it was looking at setting short-term priorities, but also continuing to look ahead in the long term to the establishment of the EHEA for 2010. And there were 8 in total, and as Rebecca had mentioned, they're always named after the city in which the meeting took place. So here's just the list, if you need the list. So starting in 2001 in Prague, and then going to 2018 in Paris. What we wanted to do, though, in this section is kind of look at these communiques, these ideas, these themes. What does it mean for our work in credential evaluation? And so these aren't really more answers. They're more kind of making you to think about your own work and what you see. And if you see any themes in your own work coming through, do you see more evidence of lifelong learning or different styles of learning on transcripts? Do you see people or transcripts where individuals have studied abroad for a semester or a year? So just kind of as we go through these, think about drawing that linkage. So for Berlin 2003, the 2 themes that I picked out when I read the communique was quality assurance and the recognition of degrees and periods of study. So quality assurance is at the heart, or one of those pillars that Luca had talked about at setting up the EHEA. And when you think of quality, it's the basis for real accountability in your academic system and within that national framework. And when I thought of quality in the work that I do, it's at the heart of what I do every day, looking for recognition, looking for a quality assurance, whether it's the program or the university, whatever framework you're working in. But also that recognition of degrees and periods of study. So once again, thinking about your own work and how does that theme impact your work every day. When we go on to London in 2007, it was the qualifications framework and the adoption of the Bologna framework in other parts of the world. The qualification frameworks, which we'll get to later on this morning, they're an important instrument in achieving comparability and transparency in the EHEA. And it's leading up to those national frameworks that are certified against the EHEA overarching framework. And so starting to think of how do those qualifications frameworks assist you in your work? Do they? Do you use them? Do they help you establish comparability when you're looking at credentials or recognition? Bologna and other parts of the world, really Bologna at this time was creating interest in other parts of the world, which Rebecca had talked about. And some countries have adopted the Bologna framework, which is outside of that European area. And you may explain why you see different structures in other jurisdictions that are starting to resemble the Bologna style or the Bologna process. In 2009, when we look at Leuven and Louvain-la-Neuve, lifelong learning and mobility. Even though lifelong learning actually was introduced in 2001 in Prague, this was kind of a focus at this time. And it really, as we all know, lifelong learning implies that learning can be obtained through flexible learning paths. So think about part-time studies, think about work-based routes. I know we have started to see, before yesterday, but I can't give you the exact date, but we have started to see more transcripts that have evidence that other things have been taken into consideration to admit somebody into a program. So whether they have other types of studies or maybe a competency-based style of assessment. So once again, that whole idea of that learning can take place anywhere. Learning isn't just sitting in a seat in a university, although I'm sure the universities would like me to say that. But when you also think about mobility, so when you start to see individuals who are doing semesters or years abroad, but that all of that is counted. I remember when I was in university, quite some time ago now, you only had an option to go abroad to 2 different universities, and it was all very prescribed. It wasn't a very open process, and maybe I should have gone, because I think I could have gone to Italy, but I didn't. But you think now you see people on their transcripts, they've spent time all over the world sometimes, and so once again, just thinking about your own work in these themes. And then Paris, so 2018, innovation in teaching and learning, digitalization, and the development and enhancement of interdisciplinary programs. And if you think of digitalization, how has that changed your work in how you receive data or transcripts from students when you're assessing them? Of course, in line with data protection legislation, I know more and more we're starting to receive transcripts from clearinghouses. We're starting to get data instead of actually transcripts. And so how has that really impacted your work? I think the more we move, gone are the days of only receiving information by mail from a secure source. We may be moving more to that mobility of data as well and receiving information from students. And I think that's kind of, so once again, the idea of this section was just as you're listening to the different parts of the presentation, when we get into diploma supplements and ECTS and those qualifications frameworks, just try to always think about how that impacts your own work. How does that change what you see? Does it explain why you're seeing some things that you're seeing? So I find it always helpful when I'm at a conference to do that. So we wanted to include that, kind of those ideas that, it's not really just about, us speaking. It's really about having that dialogue and thinking about your own work. I think we've got, our break is for not another hour, right? We're going to keep going then. All right, so we're going to go on to the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And so we kind of are moving back a little bit because Lisbon is from '97. But we thought it was really important to include it. And as Luca had mentioned, it's one of the pillars. So agreeing to be a signatory to the Lisbon Recognition Convention. So the Lisbon is the Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education in the European region. It was an international agreement signed by 55 signatory states, and that was signed in Lisbon, Portugal in 1997. And it entered into force on February 1st, 1999, but later in some countries, depending on the ratification date. So when you're thinking of being a signatory, signing the convention or a treaty is states they're expressing their interest to comply with it. But it's an expression of intent, it's not legally binding. So when it's ratified, that's when it becomes legally binding. So I'll give you the example. Canada signed the Lisbon Recognition Convention quite some time ago. It was only ratified June 18th, 2018. So that's when it became legally binding for us.
Right now it's legally binding.
Yeah, it's legally binding.
What about this?
I don't think so.
No, it's interesting. Do you know if US...
And not with the
No,
current-
you go ahead.
Not with the current administration.
I'm not sure
No,
about
no,
that.
Do you know about US? US signed it, Biden yet ratified the convention.
Yeah.
Why? Because, of course, you are not a central authority on higher education. Department of Education cannot sign instead of other states. And it's very, very interesting.
You come up.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Not at all, Luca, please.
And this is very interesting, the Canadian experience, because they made a lot of time to make an agreement among all the ministers of all the provinces. Because there is no also central authority in Canada as well. Yeah. And so it's very, very interesting. Also Italy, we signed, but we ratify. We deposit the ratification instrument in 2011 after 9 years of the internal ratification. It's very, very interesting, the process of ratification of international treaties.
Okay, just, once again, I should have explained. Let me explain something. This workshop is being videotaped and recorded for anybody who is going to apply for who's interested in getting the Bologna Process Bologna Process Certificate later. So if they're not here, they can just go and they'll be able to look on a video. So that's why we need you to stand up and speak out very clearly so anybody who looks at this later can hear the question and then also hear the answer. So I know some people have very soft voices, so just speak out as loud as you can. Thank you.
Hi, I work at the provincially mandated service of British Columbia, Canada, and we understand that the LRC has been ratified. And we understand that Canada is legally bound now to the LRC, but and we're doing our very best to abide by the principles of the LRC. But what happens if we can't for everything? Is Michael Ringette going to come down?
You have to talk to Michael
What
about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, as you know, all the treaties need an international organization that look after the implementation or everything. And in this case, is the Council of Europe. It's not the UNESCO. Even if this is a UNESCO convention, it's a very strange convention because we have two secretariats, Council of Europe and UNESCO. So it means there are 55 countries on that. So the Council of Europe is the organization that people can contact, institution people, etc., in order to have the correct implementation. But of course, if you ratify, it means that the principle of the convention became part of your internal legislation. And one principle of the Lisbon is the main one, and a very, very important one, that the recognition or fair evaluation became a personal right of a single person. Like a right to be safe, like a right to have all the personal rights. It means that with that principle, and if you ratify the text, it means that the text is inserted right now officially in your legislation. It means that it's a problem not right now at international level, but a national one. So in front of your courts, in front of your organization, your bureaucratic aspect of bodies, etc., etc. So this is the reason why there is a difference between the countries that sign and the countries that ratify. When you ratify an international treaty, you have to deposit the instrument of ratification. It means the laws and all the instruments that you use to prove that you really include the convention in your national legislation. And this is the point. Right now it became something that is played at national level. So it means that you can go on the court in Canada and say, oh, that institution doesn't apply with that kind of element, no? But is is very new point for Canada. For other countries, not so new. So people can use that point in order to express their right to be a fair recognition. Is that clear enough?
Yes, but maybe I'll follow up later.
Okay, because there is no any kind of international way to force you do something.
So it's up to the individual to say you're not abiding by that.
No, it's up to the country. The country take in their legislation the convention. Mm-hmm. It means that because it's a part of your legislation right now in different ways, but it's a part of your legislation, people can ask to apply the principles and everything.
Could I throw in one extra bit on that, which is because Canada has no national federal Ministry of Education, therefore it was the 13 jurisdictions that signed, and therefore British Columbia was one of those jurisdictions. So British Columbia has itself ratified, and therefore it is the government here in British Columbia that will enforce it.
Could you stand up and speak out loudly so everybody can hear?
My question is, what does it mean for the educational institution to be a signatory of the convention?
So we'll get to that. Great question. This was just my stats slide.
Yeah, it means that if you don't follow the principles and methodologies stated in the convention, of course, there are principles, also the concept of substantial differences. The convention say you can refuse a recognition if you find a substantial difference among your qualification or system, etc., and the other one. But the same convention doesn't list any kind of typology of substantial differences. There are a lot of differences, but some of those are substantial. So some countries say duration, of course, or institution is a substantial one. For us, not. But it means that you have to be clear with your clients, students, etc., and you have to be fair in the recognition procedures. And then there are other parts very, very related to refugees, or other part of the convention very clear on transnational education institutions, etc. But of course, those principles have to be inserted in your recognition procedures. Considering that in most of countries, the institutions are autonomous to make the recognition, for example, also in Italy, the recognition is not made by the state, but is made by the single higher education institution. The institution has to be in line with the principles. If it's not, student, researcher, or everyone that asks a procedure to you can go to the court and say, sorry, that institution is not in line with something that is a principle and is something legal binding at national level. That is the convention. But if the institution is clear that for them a substantial difference is that one, etc., very clear to the public, of course you can say it's not the case for me, but you are in line with the convention, of course. Because I'm a credential evaluator, right? I'm a TAICEP member also.
So we'll just go over the purpose of the convention if you're not familiar with it. But the Lisbon Recognition Convention forms the basis and sets the standards for recognition in the European region. So it's a treaty between states by which the parties and competent authorities of a party undertake to fulfill the obligations that are specified in the treaty. The competent authorities include organizations that take decisions regarding recognition, so think of higher educational institutions or a regulatory body, and therefore are bound by the principles of the treaty. Fundamental principles are regarding fair recognition of qualifications and periods of study, and the burden of proof lies with the receiving institution that somebody doesn't there's a reason why recognition can't occur. The burden of proof is not with the applicant to prove themselves. The burden of proof lies with the institution that somebody doesn't have the appropriate qualifications. So each country shall recognize foreign qualifications, pardon me, unless it can show, one second. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Each country shall recognize foreign qualifications unless it can show that substantial differences exist between the foreign qualification and the corresponding qualification in the host country. So I'll give an example. I work in a regulatory body for the teaching profession. If somebody is applying to our organization to become a teacher, the burden of proof is on us as the regulatory body that the individual presenting those qualifications for consideration, if they're substantially different than what it would be to have a teaching qualification in the province of Ontario. So the burden of proof lies with us as the regulatory body. We wanted to include this in the workshop, so we always ask the question, why are you including this? The Lisbon recognition, as Luca had mentioned, is one of those pillars, and it's regarded as the main international legal text that aims to further fair recognition of access to qualifications in higher education, and fair access is one of the key areas of the Bologna process. Beyond the European area, the Lisbon Recognition Convention has been a model for other UNESCO regional conventions. So if you think of the Asia-Pacific Convention, which is the Tokyo Convention of 2011, or the convention for the African region, the Arusha Convention, also in 2011. So I think we've gone through all those items. So if you remember that key word that Luca had mentioned is in the convention is about substantial differences. So what does that mean? What is a substantial difference? So the basic assumption of the convention, just so we all know, is foreign qualifications shall be recognized unless the competent recognition authority is able to demonstrate that a substantial difference between the qualification for which recognition is sought and the corresponding qualification in the country, or rather the education system in which the recognition is sought. So minor differences do not provide sufficient reasons for non-recognition. And what that does then is it's taking into account the diversity of higher education systems around the world, the traditions, and acknowledges that there are usually differences between corresponding qualifications and education systems. I don't think that would be a shock to anybody. There are differences, so it's trying to identify what is a substantial difference and what's a minor difference. The existence of differences does not provide a sufficient reason for non-recognition, so it has to be a substantial difference. And if there is a substantial difference, it may provide a reason to either recognize a qualification, and I'll get to that because you think, oh, if there's a substantial difference, why would I recognize it? To give partial recognition or to give no recognition. I've already talked about the responsibility is with the authority that's being charged with that. I just want to make sure. Yes, oh, that's the part. So the differences should be substantial in relation to the function of the qualification and the purpose for which qualification is sought. The last point, so provides a reason for non-recognition without a corresponding obligation. What does that mean? A competent recognition authority may choose to recognize a qualification even if it considers that substantial differences exist. So in these cases, it's reasonable to assume that other factors have outweighed the substantial difference. So it's not binding in the sense that if an organization is looking at a credential and says, yes, there is a substantial difference, it doesn't automatically mean that they don't have to recognize it, because there could be something else that they're looking that outweighs that substantial difference. So what are some examples of substantial differences? The difference between general education and specialized technical education may be considered a substantial difference. The length of study, only if it affects the curriculum content. So it may not be enough just to say, well, it's 3 years versus 4 years. It has to be more than that. So is that length, is that difference affecting the curriculum or the content or the learning outcomes achieved from that program? The presence or absence of specific prerequisites, so that could be a substantial difference. If the program was designed for entry into higher education versus employment, that might be a substantial difference. We talked about gaps in the curriculum or the learning outcomes. Perhaps the awarding institution is not recognized. That may be a reason for a substantial difference. The level of the qualification, the content and the outcomes is so different from what would be expected in the host jurisdiction of a similar qualification. So I gave the example of the teaching profession, but you can think of how that would apply in your own institution. Is it admission requirements into an undergraduate degree or a master's degree? What are you looking for, and what are your substantial differences? The convention established two bodies to oversee, promote, and facilitate the implementation of the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And so those two are the Committee of the Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education in the European Region. That's long. And the European Network of Information Centers for Academic Mobility and Recognition. So think of your ENIC network. And so the ENIC network was established by the Council of Europe in 1994 to implement the LRC and to develop policy and practice for the recognition of qualifications by providing information on foreign qualifications, education systems, and mobility schemes. So Lisbon now was in 1997. What are the next steps? So 2012 and beyond, the UNESCO member states are drafting a new convention, a global convention on the recognition of qualifications concerning higher education. And there are several goals. The first one being the implementation of Sustainable Development Number 4, SDG, Sustainable Development Goal Number 4. So UNESCO has, I think there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and SD4 is regarding quality education. So if you are interested, you can go on the UNESCO site and you can see what all those goals are, but SD4 is related to quality education. One of the other goals is related to growth in student mobility, recognition of academic credentials as a global right. So you'd heard Luca talk about it's a right to be recognized. International consistency in recognition procedures and increased international cooperation. So Lisbon is kind of I'll give you a personal anecdote. It's actually substantial differences was written into our regulation. So we are to recognize a program of professional education unless we can demonstrate that substantial differences exist. So, and that was in our 2010. So in our regulation that we use at the college, that's part of the Ontario College of Teachers Act, substantial differences is actually written right in the regulation. So we have to identify what those substantial differences are. Yeah.
At OCT, what is your definition?
Such a great question. So we kind of group them. What I would say is, so this is related to the program of professional education. We have a lot of partial recognition. So when we're looking at composition of a program or content of a program, when we have absolutely what I would consider a substantial difference that we wouldn't recognize it as at all, is if the qualification that is seeking to be recognized was awarded by an institution that wasn't recognized in its host jurisdiction. So if it's not recognized as a teacher education program in that jurisdiction, we don't recognize it as as a credential that would be recognized for teaching in the province of Ontario. That's one. Yeah? Okay. Another one for us is level. So in some parts of the world, teachers are educated at high school instead of post-secondary. So we would say that that is substantially different than the type of program that is required in Ontario, because it's a post-secondary program. It's a degree program in Ontario most of the time. And then the third, I would say, is the difference between employment-based programs and academic programs. So we see those I would say are our big three that we see as substantially different. And so while, I'm going to say, we probably should, as Luca would say, be transparent about it, our guide says that our registration guides indicate what programs we don't recognize, but we don't use the word substantial difference. So, yeah, please. Yeah.
Because this is very, sorry, because really, I'm a credential evaluator, I'm a director of the Italian Enigmatic Center, and that question is very, very interesting, because we are credential evaluators. It means that we evaluate. The evaluation is a complex process. As my friend Stephen Hunt used to say, it was more an art than a science at the end, because you had to combine a lot of different elements, the purpose of the recognition, and see the real case. If you list, or you are so strict to list something that, of course, you consider a substantial difference, is something that create some problem in the case-by-case evaluation. But if you list your methodology, and this is the point very important, so the methodology have to be objective. If you list your methodology, it's something that you need to be clear with your clients. It means that your methodology could be, we only accept official qualification. What I mean with official qualification outside, accredited or recognized, and coming from official higher education institution or accredited. This is a sentence of the topic. And then there is a problematic point about transnational education institutions that are operating in another country. Are they accredited there or not? And this is another point that you have to take into account. Or the level. Of course, we accept at the same level, the same qualification. But if you don't see, or if you are so strict on the fact of substantial differences, I think it's something that you see on the field, because there are three elements that create a difference, also substantial difference. The difference among your qualification and my qualification, the difference between the architecture of your system and my system, and the third one that's very important, the difference how I obtain the final qualification. That is something, another element that you have to take into account. It doesn't mean that if you have an official qualification, I have to recognize it. I make you a very clear example. Validation of qualification made by UK institutions. You have an official qualification, 100% official, awarded by an official recognized body. I have to recognize it if you obtain outside another country without any kind of system of check the quality? No, but I have an official one. So please note that it's very interesting, the point of substantial difference, because you can see on the field what real is substantial or not, taking into account that we are different. For example, another point, we said in our methodology, we can recognize something that exists in our system. If it doesn't exist, we can make a partial recognition. 2 examples, associate degree, we don't have associate degree. It means that every associate we receive, we don't recognize, no. We make a recognition of credit in a formal bachelor program, partial recognition. Second, discipline, medicine of Chinese traditional medicine. We don't recognize as a discipline in our system. We cannot recognize. Probably you do some courses that we can recognize, or theology. It's very strange. In Italy, theology is not an official discipline. No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, pontifical institutions that are from the Vatican, and this is the reason why. For us, it's not an official. So
why isn't that?
Why?
Yeah, that's
Because of course, if you are some neighbor, you try to be and to fight with them a lot. No, you know that Italy is a very young country. We have a unified, we are a unified country since 150 years. Before we have a lot of kingdoms, and we have also the Vatican that have part of the system. And so it was unified from people that were ideologically against the Vatican and the Church. And so this the reason why that right now we have a treaty, with the Vatican that establish all the rules, that is called Concordat, okay? Establish all the rules, and also the recognition of degrees at university level, in theology, for example. And so we decide when we start the country not to have that disciplines for us, but to leave the disciplines to others, because we have a lay country, in a sense,
Okay.
for that reason.
Thank you. Is there any other questions about Lisbon or substantial differences? Yes.
So this kind of brought up, and let me see if I can phrase this question. So does each individual country make their own decisions about credentials? So like something that when you were going through this came up to my mind is like India.
Mm-hmm.
So through the Lisbon Recognition Convention, does this set what each country, how they would see a 3-year bachelor's degree from India, or does Italy decide, or does each institution in Italy decide how they view that credential, or is everybody in the Bologna process in agreement with like a 3-year degree in India? So does
I think the short answer is no.
to make those decisions?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, it's good also because we are in a place where we can discuss on that point. Please note that we have something unique, enigmatic centers. So within the Lisbon Recognition Convention, there are national information centers, and they took the NARIC and ENICS. Are you familiar with NARIC and ENICS? NARIC from the European Union started in 1984. ENICS from the Council of Europe, UNESCO, started in 1993. And then we discuss all kind of things like that, and we spread the recognition culture within our national systems. Of course, taking into account their institutions are autonomous to say yes or no, or to evaluate in a different way. But the point that we try to have a common understanding, non-common rules, because it's up to the country, but common understanding of substantial differences of those kind of things together in order to have a common vision, in a sense. And starting to the fact that we work since a lot of years together, we try to better understand each other. We have a specific listserv when we exchange regularly every day all the information. We have regular meetings, etc. And I think also the meaning to have that association and the fact that we are involved in is that we want to collaborate with other credential evaluators in order to better understand everything. There was a message of the European Union, and then I stopped myself, that they speak about automatic recognition, and they say in an ideological way, I think, all the bachelor is a bachelor is a bachelor. It means that all the bachelors are equal. But the reality of fact is that, thanks to a quote of my friends, that all the bachelors are equal, but there are some bachelors that are more equal than others. And this is the point, the real point that we have in our field. We know that. And so the fact to collaborate together is to find better common understanding on standard and guidelines together.
So, do you guys recognize
Sorry?
Do you recognize the Indian 3-year bachelor's degree as a bachelor's degree?
We recognize it,
We do.
but please note that, for example, our master degree of the pre-Bologna system are not recognized in UK right now. It's a question. And what happened, because it's some years that doesn't happen, that they didn't recognize, we stop any relation with UK now, formally. This is the only point that we have, to say after 20 years that you consider a honors bachelor, our master, integrated master, we have to do, you can do something. You can explain, etc., and try to have, but at the end you can take also your. Please note that the recognition is not only the fact of your national level, because if one country discover that you don't recognize in a good way, or in a better way, or as are recognized at national level, their qualification, something diplomatic issue can be shown. And this is important, of course, to take into account that the recognition is not imply only my national situation, and of course the social impact that the recognition has.
I think there could be a whole session on that question alone.
Always are.
Yes.
At least one session.
So to make sure we get through all the content, we're going to keep moving, but I think these are great conversations to have on breaks and in the hall, and we can all have a debate on them. So I'm going to move on to the elements of a qualification. And we thought this was really important to add into this workshop because you'll hear a lot of these terms brought up in different contexts. So when Kate talks about ECTS and the degree structure, you'll hear these terms. When we talk about the qualifications framework, we'll use these terms. So these are the 5 elements or characteristics of a qualification. The first one being level. So it's probably fairly easy to understand, but it designates the place a given qualification is within the education system or the qualifications framework. And it's also used in other countries outside of Europe. So if you think about the qualifications frameworks, we've got Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and we have some examples later on. So if you think of bachelor, master, it doesn't really matter what the terminology is, but it's about describing the levels. So it could be first cycle, second cycle, whatever the case may be, but it's indicating the different levels. Workload, it's duration for me, but we'll call it workload. It refers to the amount of work required to successfully complete a unit of learning. So if you think in the US and the Canadian context, that's usually in credits, or some of the universities in Ontario use courses. And in the Bologna process, the currency of the workload is ECTS. Quality of the program, quality of the institution. If an institution or program has failed a quality assessment, this would provide a reason for non-recognition. And then profile. Profile has actually 2 concepts in this one component. The overall orientation of the institution or a study program. So if you think of a binary system that distinguishes between university and non-university studies, so that could be part of what we talk about when we're talking about profile, or the role of research, the extent to which a program is theoretical or applied is kind of the profile. But the second component in profile is the individual characteristics of the qualification. So it's that balance between specialization and a broader orientation. So this is kind of important in the context of recognition. When you think in many European systems, they've traditionally emphasized specialization in a certain area or a certain specialty, area of study. I'm losing my words. Whereas when you think of the North American context, it's kind of more favored that liberal arts education or that broader orientation. And finally, learning outcomes. So what a graduate knows and should be able to do on the basis of a qualification. And the emphasis is on the outcomes that more than over the formal structure of the study program. So what do they know and what are they able to do at the end of that program? The challenge for us as learning outcomes they're very difficult to describe. And as we all know in our work, they're very difficult to assess. So sometimes length of study or periods of study often they're sometimes the most meaningful for us because they're also the most straightforward for us to look at, where learning outcomes are often more complex. And this is where my time ends, and I pass it over to Kate, who's I call this more the meat. So over to you, Kate. There you go.
Does anybody need any chocolate to get through the next session?
Okay.
We all good?
All right.
Yeah.
And while Rebecca's doing that, we have some breaking news. San Marino has submitted their national report. So All right, great. Okay, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of the stuff that we all work with when we look at qualifications from a Bologna signatory country. So the first, let me get started here. I'm not going to read this. I think you all know how, have a basic reading level that you can be able to read this, so we'll skip that. But anyway, how many of you always thought that ECTS just stood for European Credit Transfer System? I'm honest, all right. I didn't realize that it also included an accumulation. So this is a very important thing for you to know, that it's the European Credit Transfer and Accumulation System. This was first proposed and instituted in 1989 as part of Erasmus. Do you all know what Erasmus is? Okay. For those of you who don't know, Erasmus is, I'm sorry, I've got to get myself organized here, was an agreement among European countries that allowed students at European universities to study for a specific period of time, so basically study abroad, and that was 3 months to a year. So that was very different from what was going to happen was to have student mobility so they could actually go and finish a degree program at a university. So Erasmus is just think study abroad, as opposed to the Bologna process, where you complete it or transfer in or earn credits in a degree program. But now, ECTS allows for a transfer of credits for students who have studied abroad and are also in a degree study. It allows students to facilitates mobility of students, because now students and universities will know what their credits earned in one institution will have the same value in another institution. We all know, all of us who work outside of the European Union, we see credits, we have credits in one university, could be 5 credits a class. You could have Spanish 101 could be 3 credits in one place, 4 credits in another. And so with ECTS, the classes will have these standardized credit units. It also helps institutions know how they're going to deal with credits and courses that are earned at institutions that are in Bologna signatory countries. So, where are we going? All right. So the key features of ECTS, there are several of them. As we talked about, were the ECTS credits. And I should say that these can be applied to all types of study. It's not just classroom study. It could be work-based study, which is a concept that's very different for those of us in North America, unless you work for an institution where students do co-op placements where they're actually working and getting credit for that work. But this is, it can be other situations too that are work-based. It could be distance learning, which is now as we all know, is a very big concept around the world. It can be based on full-time or part-time study. It could be formal, it could be non-formal, which is also another concept that's very difficult for those of us in North America, is non-formal learning. We're all so used to people sitting in a classroom and and listening to a professor lecture to them. But ECTS also measures outside the classroom learning, or non-formal. Luca, can you help me understand the difference between non-formal and informal learning? He doesn't know?
I know the difference. The problem is that anyone doesn't know the real one.
Okay.
Non-formal, informal, it means that informal, it means that there is a official training or something organized under the learning path, and non-formal is that one.
Okay.
Informal, it's a difficult. Informal, it means that in a during my life, I can understand something and doing my job, for example, and then I can do, is that?
So this is non-formal.
This is, okay.
This session that
perfect.
we're in today, this is non-formal learning experience, right? It's organized, we have a.
No, this is.
This is non-formal. Informal would be
Okay.
what we pick up in a conversation.
Okay, one is in, I'm not 100% sure that non-formal, informal or is the opposite one, but the difference is that one. That one that is organized in a session not by the academic institution, and the other one in your daily life.
Right, because I couldn't find it. I could not find a definition of the difference between non-formal and informal as when it comes to ECTS credit assignment. So that was a new one for me as I did this.
But the ECTS, they measure at the end a formal performance.
Right.
Because you can achieve those learning outcomes in different ways, but at the end, you receive the ECTS for a formal performance.
Okay. So ECTS expresses the volume of learning a student has accomplished, and it's based on the learning outcomes and the workload. So Marianne had talked about learning outcomes and workload, and I'm going to be talking about that a little later. 60 credits per academic year is the standard for ECTS. It's per academic year or the equivalent. So each institution or jurisdiction has to decide what that ACTS is being based on. They say generally it's a whole number. I have never seen anything but a whole number on a diploma supplement. Has anybody seen anything? All right, so which I found that in my research, I thought that was very interesting because, like I said, I've never seen anything else but a whole number. Learning outcomes are a statement of what a student knows, understands, and can do. Marianne had talked about that later. So that will be discussed on the diploma supplement, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So it seems like everything falls back on the diploma supplement. Everything coalesces around the same principles. The assessment has to be based, again, as we've talked about, a very clear and transparent criteria. So student has to know how they're going to be assessed in a particular course. So the professor has to tell them, this is, you're going to be, we're going to have 5 exams or whatever, you're going to submit a paper, but it has to be very clear and transparent to the student and to an institution or to anybody who asks how that student was assessed in that course. Learning outcomes are also used in the national qualifications frameworks, which Marianne will talk about a little bit later. So what the learning outcome will determine where a particular qualification lands on that country's national qualifications framework. Yes?
Sorry, I just have a question about the total amounts of ECTS that's required for the first and second cycle.
We're going to be going, you're ahead of me, that's in the next session, yeah. But it's just the concept that an academic year or its equivalent is based on 60 ECTS credits.
Per academic.
Yeah, it's per academic year or the equivalent. It's in the ECTS handbook.
No.
So so how often have you ever had, as students who've been outside, educated outside of any Bologna signatory country, how often have you had a course where you weren't really quite sure how you're going to be assessed? I know I did. I had a professor that just wouldn't even tell us how we were going to be assessed, so it wasn't very transparent. So that's why ECTS it's mandated that the assessment criteria has to be very clear. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm dealing with a cold here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, workload. So the workload is the estimation of the time it's needed to achieve all these different outcomes. And that can include many, many different things, such as lectures, seminars, projects, practical work, the work placement, for example, a co-op assignment, or what would be the equivalent of that, and individual study. So, and they estimate that should be about 1,500 to 1,800 hours per academic year for students, which seems like a lot, but when you think about North American studies, when they do credits, they include classroom and then the time a student spends in individual study outside, basically studying or preparing for the next class. And one ECTS credit equals approximately 25 to 30 credits. So based on the 25 to 30 25 to 30 hours is how a class or a professor or an institution determines how many credits that particular class will be awarded. The ECTS, how many ECTS credits will be awarded in a particular degree program it's often based on national legislation. So an institution might not they might not be able to say, well, this bachelor's degree is going to be 120 ECTS credits. They might want it to be more, but their national legislation says it has to be this amount. So sometimes there's not a lot of institutional autonomy in how many ECTS credits a particular program will be. So the allocation of credits is how they're assigned to different qualification and degree programs or single educational components. So once again, it's based on national legislation or practice. So if the practice has been for example, a teaching program in a particular country has always been this many ECTS credits, it's usually what it's going to be. It's going to be the same thing across every program in that teaching program in that country. But once again, I'm talking in generalities. Some countries it is based on national legislation, and some countries institutions have institutional autonomy to determine how long they want their particular programs to be. The ECTS is allocated to course units, so if a particular student is taking a course, they're going to get awarded ECTS credits. They're going to be awarded credits for a dissertation or a thesis, and they're going to be awarded ECTS credits for work placement. So everything they do in a particular educational program is going to be awarded ECTS. So that's why when we see transcripts, we see all these credits awarded for, especially in France, where they drill down. They have the course and they drill down for each individual topic within that course. We see so many, the ECTS is how they're distributed within a particular course. So the only time a student is actually going to get awarded credits on their transcript is when they actually have achieved the learning outcomes that are expected within that particular course, or after they have had the appropriate assessment for that course. So students are not going to get, they're not going to get partial credits because they didn't do one part of the exam. They have to complete all the learning outcomes that were required for that course. Credits, like we talked about, can be awarded for non-formal and formal learning.
We do have clarification on what is non-formal and what is informal.
Okay.
A session such as this is informal learning. So it's not organized by a higher education institution. It's not organized by a school. It is, however, an association and it's opportunity for learning in an environment like that. So this is informal learning. Nobody's getting academic credit for this. Non-formal learning is any interaction you might have in your daily life and pick up some information from.
Job, family.
Jobs, families, yeah. having a conversation with someone outside, things like that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, I'm going to go through just the rest of this slide because we have a break coming up, and I see a lot of blank faces. I know you're tired, you want some coffee and things, because we're going to... we're going to be throwing a lot of information, especially in this next half, where we're really getting down to the more the nitty-gritty and not less theoretical study. So, the accumulation credit. So another part of the ECTS is accumulation of credits. So you have to accumulate a certain number of credits in order to earn a qualification. That's pretty standard around for any qualification in any country and around the world. So, but it also, in addition to the ECTS credits and earning the degree, it also documents that your personal achievement within that degree. So, you've got the ECTS credits. It's going to say, this is what you achieved through this earning this qualification. And what I'm saying is all going to come together in all the rest of the things when we talk about diploma supplements and qualifications framework. So it might sound a little ooh right now, but it will come together. All right, so by my watch, it is 10 o'clock. No, I'm going to stop here because it is 10 o'clock and there is a break. We have a 15-minute break, and if you could be back here at 10:15 sharp, because believe me, we got a whole lot to go through before the end of the workshop. And also, if you came in a little later, could you come up so we can check you off so we can make sure that you were get proper recognition that you're actually here?